Welcome WEB21. Today we're going to be going through Intro to React. It is all about components and component state. This is, like I mentioned before recording here, this is one of my favorite lessons. We're going to cover the fundamentals of React. We're going to compare it to some of the concepts we covered last week, and we're going to learn more about about what state is and how it changes the designs that we became familiar with. So a lot of the things are going to build on what we did before, but a lot of things are going to get simpler. So it's really important to know those fundamental concepts because they are the building blocks of React apps. Things like selectors, you'll see still, we still are in the web, we still need to design it. Things like events. These are still rich modern web apps. They are driven by events and interactions and clicks and scrolls and all the other many events. So this is really where we kind of take all the front end pieces we've been learning and really level up and take it into what I think is one of the most exciting new developments in the front end eras, and that is all around hooks. So let's get into it here. Let me share my screen, get some objectives up here for you. Okay. So by the end of this module, you should be able to describe React.js and the problems that it tries to solve, explain what components are and how they work in React, and explain what state is in web applications and demonstrate how to make a React component stateful. And the last one is change the state of a component with a click listener. Some of these words are going to should seem familiar. Like we see components, we see click listeners or click handlers, and this is there's some common themes here that should be triggering your memory from last week. So let's get into the first one here. Let's describe what React.js is and the problems it tries to solve. So I hope everyone had a chance to go through the training kit. We've got there's some great links buried in here. This try React tutorial here, it's quite fantastic. There's also this link here. The React homepage actually does a pretty good job describing, kind of the marketing angle of why to use it. And what we want to do is we want to dig a little bit deeper. We want to get that understanding of what React is really solving. And I think by the end of this, you'll definitely be able to describe it beyond what these kind of marketing-y takes are. React makes it painless to create interactive UIs. Wait, was that a promise? Is it really going to be painless? And design simple views for each state in your application, and React will efficiently update and render just the right components when your data changes. Oh, sounds like it's just sunshine and rainbows. So this is the pitch. You'll commonly hear these sorts of statements on Twitter or on short format blogs when people are trying to make a case for their favorite framework. But really, what I think makes React special is that it combines the JavaScript and the HTML aspect of your designs into a single file. So this is not like brand new to all of web development, but it enabled some really important design changes. If you've ever been going through a project and you are looking through like 20 different files and going from HTML files to JavaScript files and jumping around, and then trying to see if they really are related, or if the class name you have here match over here, that can be hard to juggle. And I certainly feel that way. And what React really does is it kind of stitches this all together. It makes you so you can think in terms of not what type of things they are, like HTML versus CSS, but what are they doing? Like, is this my hello message? Okay, well, it needs a container div and the ability to print out a given name. So this kind of keeps the template and the logic all together. So this may not seem like some groundbreaking, revolutionary idea, but trust me, when like this used to be considered like, I don't want to go through the whole history lesson, but this was really controversial when it came out, and it has basically overcome all of the conventional wisdom, and really it's now influencing every other front-end framework. So that's kind of like the high-level stuff, and I like focus on those for what React is trying to solve. It's trying to solve some of the ways we try to build mental models of our apps are really broken in a pre-React world where we have too many fractured pieces of apps all over the place that lead to brittle designs. They are hard to build on top of, and that wasn't really working. So React, I think, solves this by building more cohesive components. So, and by the way, there are some great details here. Like there's things like the virtual DOM. There's details in here. Those are fantastic. They optimize how the rendering happens. But again, like you don't have to know about that stuff to use it. Like in fact, most senior engineers who I ask about the virtual DOM have no idea what it really is. And it's actually like a lot of fun trivia, but today I want to focus on what our components in React look like, and I'll relate them to our work from last week. So let me actually pull up some of the, get my microphone out of the way here. Let me pull up really quickly our, one of the projects from last week. Okay, so this is our plain old HTML or our plain old vanilla JS components. They are pretty simple, but let's take a look here at what's going on. There's a lot of creating elements manually. We're manipulating, like these are very, very carefully threaded template construction going on here inside our functions. This is a lot of lines just to represent this, okay? So basically, when you're manually having to do all this repetitive work to put together the DOM and how you want the HTML to actually, become live on the page, it's very ornate. Like it's easy to miss steps and mess it up. So that's another area React really improves on. You don't have these, you don't work against the tree, you represent it like so. So here, again, like React apps embed the HTML or what's called the JSX inside our JavaScript files. And it literally gets included inline. So let's go back to Training Kit. So yeah, this is basically like if you were to represent this before, you would have to do a document.createElement div and a document.createElement h1, and then you'd have to do div.append and then pass in the h1 and set the h1's text content to high lambda. Oh man, that's a lot of steps, especially when you know what structure it is and you just want to represent it. So that, again, that is really one of the best advantages of React and JSX is it simplifies your actual templating. So let's look into it a little bit more. So here, who can tell me, just reading this, and I know we've got people who've been studying React for a couple of weeks. Some of you have been really eager to get on to this material. Some of you are seeing this for the first time. But that said, I want you to think about what's going on here. And this isn't a string template literal, as some of you may guess. Pay attention to what this is doing. I want you to answer, give me a thread in WEB21. I want to know, what is that doing? What's between the curly braces? And okay, so we got a good, okay, there seems to be a little bit of a debate here. Is it JSX? Is it JavaScript? It's a variable, yeah. JS, okay, so here's the distinction here. So let me highlight this. So when people are just like, oh, well, this is JSX, it can be frustrating to figure out like, oh, they're just casually referring to that block of HTML-y looking things in there. But when you open your curly braces, what's actually happening is you've opened up into JavaScript. You can now interpolate or concatenate, or sorry for the jargon, you can inject a JavaScript expression right in the middle of your HTML. So you can see it rendering down here. They're giving an example where you have a variable called greeting, and then the greeting is just being thrown dynamically in there. And this is so it's really great that I love your answers here. So yeah, it's at a certain level, yeah, it's just JavaScript. Though some purists will raise an eyebrow and be like, that is not JavaScript. It needs to be pre-processed. Sorry, I meant to mention, I know that I had some of the anonymous questions. So Slido's non-anonymous today. Sorry to interrupt our lesson. This is important. Slido, I was having trouble following up with people. I kept getting questions that I couldn't close the loop on, and I could tell there was some frustration. And so the anonymity there was, making things get worse when people would clearly keep asking things, and it was something that needed to be handled individually. Anonymous, I can't do anything about. So it's not a good, it's not suitable in a classroom, and it's on me to make sure that you feel safe and feel comfortable asking whatever questions you need. So please, 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 this wasn't some casual or a change made lightly. This is because I feel we are struggling to close the loop on some of these things and communication. And so when they're anonymous, I can't, I can't remediate and intervene. So we're going to try it like this. Again, if you feel, if you have any misgivings about it, DM me, reach out. I'm around. Okay. That said, let's keep moving on here. I want to focus on. I want to kind of split these hairs a little bit. So our JSX, that is where our HTML elements just kind of start. As soon as we get into the curly brace, this is what will be evaluated as a JavaScript expression. I could put any JavaScript in the world in there, and whatever it returns will be converted to a string and then injected or rendered to the page. So, and then as soon as that curly brace closes, it goes down, and that's the rest of the JSX. So let's and importantly, it is not like a string template literal, though it functions similarly. String template literals, you use a $sign in curly braces, but this is a slightly different syntax. So I want you to take a look what's on my screen here. This is an example of how the regular plain old vanilla JS and vanilla HTML event listeners work. We've got a button, we select it, and then we do an add event listener. And the thing is, if you ever try to do that in React, you're doing something wrong. It is never a good idea. Like, put this in your notes. Never use document query selector or add event listener in React. It may work for a split second, but as soon as you start building on it, you're going to have a bad time. So it's important to note that this is regular HTML and this is regular JavaScript. The React way is decidedly different. So we get these attributes, or what are called props, specifically in React. So what you do is you've actually combined, this is an example of how they've combined the HTML template concept with inline, see these curly braces again? With inline JavaScript expressions, okay? So let's just read this. Let me actually post this in Slack here. Let me get some data on this. So give me some, it says, break this apart. Tell me what this is doing. And I'll include, so I'm trying to include more of the question in my Slack threads. Again, I heard your feedback there. So hopefully so check that thread in WEB21. Let me pop that on screen. So what is this doing? Tell me bit by bit. Like, what is this arrow function here doing? When will submit form be called? Mm-hmm. Excellent. Excellent. Tommy, way to use the very, very narrowly defined, technically accurate description. That's exactly right. Yeah, these are great answers. And yeah, and Justine points out, create a button when it's clicked, submit the form. That's an important thing. I wasn't just saying that that this is exists on its own. Like, the fact that it exists creates the button. It's not actually being turned into HTML. React behind the scenes is doing that, working on that virtual DOM thing to actually, all those computer science algorithms happen, and then it goes and renders it on the page. So this is, let me jump over here. So right here, we can see our, this is our guided project. And what I want to do is take what we just saw there and take this apart piece by piece here. But before we get too deep into that, let me make sure I got your info on, or your answer on this first objective. I want you to describe React.js and the problem it solves, or tries to solve. I really want to hear this in your own words, now that you've kind of got that high level and you've seen a bit of it. What does this mean to you? Let me thread that. So answer just one sentence. What does it mean to you? Like, I mean, maybe you hated writing create element over and over, or maybe that was really hard to make work. All that's now gone. What is it doing for? Excellent answers. Here, let me get these on screen. Exactly. Ooh, state machines. Yeah. Yeah, this is a way to make things more organized. And these are great answers. DOM manipulation, but without the DOM manipulation. You don't have to use DOM APIs. React just does it for you. So, and Sheila, yeah, dry and simplicity. It's easier to get to dry or don't repeat yourself as a coding mantra when you've got tools like React. It's very hard to not repeat yourself when you've got so many just create elements over and over, or even helper utilities to build your elements. It still becomes a chore to build it all out. Excellent. These are some fantastic answers here. Excellent. Yep. Levon, thanks for bringing up components. Exactly. They're about getting you easily replicable code. And part of what makes them yes, prompt stateless. Yeah. So, fantastic, everyone. Okay, let me. Excellent. Okay, and so here is so let's move on to this next objective, because it looks like you've all got a very a good and well-rounded mental model of what the hell the point is of React. What gives React? And it's not just new for the sake of new. It really does solve real problems, from specific coding, tedium, to higher level things that are about organization and repetitive code and dealing with 50 files that are going to be even harder to work with on a team when you're maybe talking past each other. So again, before I move right on, here is, in my words, React.js solves organizational challenges for teams. It solves coding tedium for developers and gives you an easier mental model to build components. So there's a lot more to it and a lot of benefits, but they are really the things that are valuable to you or to an individual team versus another team may vary. So the reasons that you kind of get these broad sweeping statements on the React homepage, including that it's painless, which that's a bold claim from any developer tool. So a lot of these are really trying to stretch over the why, or want to use, we're encapsulated components. But the main thrust of it is that may be really important for you. You may have really complex code, really complex interactions between different parts of your dashboard, streaming data coming in, widgets updating, notifications going off, whatever. That kind of code was traditionally basically built in Nightmare.js. Actually, I can't joke. Nightmare.js is a real thing. So anyway, let's let's focus on our next objective here. So explain what components are and how they work in React. So I'm gonna go and take so for this piece, I don't want to share this link out. I'll share it out afterwards if you want, but I just want you to watch for now, because I want to relate what we're doing to the current, to what we've already learned. And part of that is going to be kind of seeing how much this changes, or how much simpler this can get. And so here's our cards component from the Lambda times exercise. Here's all this DOM, manual DOM manipulation. So what I'm going to do is take this and I will put it in let's put it in a new file here. Because a lot of the stuff can seem just crazy new and hard to bring down to earth. So I'm going to show you how similar this really is. Okay, so and this might go fast. So if you blink, this is why I don't want you following along. Like this, just watch, because if you blink, you might miss this. So I'm going to take this HTML template, and then I'm going to go and inside here, I want to comment out all the other stuff. And then I'm going to go and return. It's a good idea to wrap your JSX in parentheses. And now we can see there's some placeholders I need to put values in. So I'm going to look down here, see what strings that are actually being set. It looks like we've got a text content here, article.headline. So I'm going to take that, I copied it literally from the JavaScript below, and I'm going to put it inside those curly braces. And the next piece is this article author name. And here is the article author photo. And I think it wants me to put an out. Wasn't like redundant, tells it screen reader is already announced. Okay, thanks for the tip. That's basically it. So if you blinked, you might have missed that. This is doing the same thing. We went from all this intricate DOM stuff and we kind of just changed it out. Now article card is a React component. Kind of cool. We do have Levi noticed something really important here. There's a couple differences in when you go from HTML to JSX. You can't just copy one for one. There's like one or two little changes that usually the environment will warn you about. For the longest time, you couldn't just write the word class because, class is a reserved word in JavaScript. And because we're in a JavaScript file, the parser would kind of lose its mind. So what you want to do here is go class name. And so to select those, by the way, I highlighted on it and just did Command D over and over and over to match them all, or Control D if you're on Windows. And that's the easiest way to go and convert HTML over to JSX. Thanks, Levi. Okay, but this is super close. There's one more issue with this actually, and I want to see if anyone can see this. What's special, or what is different about how React function components, how do they get their props? No, we don't use extends. We're not using classes. So extends is specifically for that class syntax, but really good guess. There's something else missing here. Okay, I think we're on the right track here. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. Let's relate this to what we see over here. So whether we're dealing with the class syntax or function syntax, this property is true of both. Props get handled in a singular way, and it is a very important detail. You will never see more than one argument passed to a constructor, literal class constructor, or a function argument. So if we go back over here, I think the editor is actually giving us a little bit of a hint here. You see how this is highlighted differently than category? Oh no, category is just not used in here. This article here and category aren't going to come through. In fact, the way to get these is via props. Props are one of the key pieces of getting data into a component. Like what makes a component different than a function? Well, the distinctions are going to be the rules around like props, where you can only pass an object into your component. We'll see in a second where these properties come from. But for now, let me go and make sure I don't, or let me show you the pattern of getting the fields you need out of props. So watch this. So const, and so right here, oh, and I guess I was doing the category data set. I guess I can replicate that too, but I don't even need to use this weird data set for the data property. I can just write out the data dash category, by the way. So okay, now all my fields are being used. Our props are good. We've got article and category all coming in. Okay. So if this is our component, the question is, or if this is if these props are where article and category now have to come from, the natural question is, well, cool, Dan, well, where do I pass those in? What is a prop? Oh, and by the way, if you're new to this kind of syntax, it's called destructuring. I hate that word. It makes me feel like whenever I'm writing it, I can't spell. Like, sure of it. Doesn't feel like the correct spelling for any appropriate word, but it's a fantastic feature. It's amazing. What it's doing is it's saying, hey, I need there's an object called props, and I need an article and a category key extracted out of it. And then they get put into, now they get made available inside this function here. So I don't have to type props.article.headline or category or props.category. You don't have to keep using chaining your dots to get into your objects. You can kind of use destructuring to unstructure, to unpackage the contents of an object to pull out just what you need. Now, another thing that comes from this is it's really nice reading this. Like, I can just see article card. Okay, so there's some kind of article. And then on the next line, it declares that article and category are the values I need to worry about on props. Like, there could be other props that are passed in, but this is a nice way to tell me, the developer, the only things that matter in this logic here are article and category. Now, when this gets to like a 100-line function, which hopefully you don't have to deal with many, but it happens. If you've got a really giant function, it can be immensely valuable to kind of, be very careful or very intentional structuring your variables and using destructuring to just tell, hey, I may be getting this whole user object, but all I care about showing are the avatar and the username. And so then when I'm looking at the header component, I may see user coming in, but I don't have to think about all the like 50 other fields that may be on the user object. I can see that, oh, it's just pulling out the avatar image and name. Cool. So it's a nice way to a hint to your future self or other developers that the only things that are going to be needed going forward in this function. So generally, if you follow this, don't mix this pattern with using props lower. If you need to pull anything else off props, add it here. Okay, so that still leads us to, well, where do props come from? Well, it's going to look very familiar. Let me move this into components. Let me rename this. Actually, let's go ahead and use this, because I think this is a pretty good example. Okay. And it's really important, you have to export your components in React. So there's a whole lot of a nuance here and a lot of stuff you can learn around imports and export, but I don't want to get lost in the weeds on that, on the ES6 stuff, or even later. Some of the stuff is still in proposal and is still getting fleshed out. I don't want to dwell on that. Let's focus on what has to be there for a functional component in any file. So you can't just, we're no longer putting index.html in here and attaching everything manually to a central element. However, React is doing that for us. Notice here, this is my HTML file. So I'm kind of going back a little bit. I want to make sure we kind of close the loop on this whole path here. This piece here, ID root, you're probably remembering adding anchoring onto cards or entry or a bunch of different generic div containers where you were putting your components from last week. Well, React works in a similar way. Here is where that stuff gets glued together. There is exactly one document.getElementID or query selector usually in a React app. And this is where the DOM interface calls stop. Once you do the document dot here and mount the root on with this React DOM render, this is the point. No more document dot anything should be happening. Okay. So let me add my article card. Components, article card. There we go. Okay, so the way you use this function is going to be different than how you use functions before. This is still calling that function, but you'll notice it's complaining about stuff. Canary property headline of undefined. This is exactly where, or this is an error you will see many a time. Now I want you to pay attention what this is telling you and how to fix this, how to unwind this. And it comes down to we're missing a property. We've got to define the prop article. Just because we have it over here, where we're extracting article and category out of the props object, let's take a look at what props actually is right now, because it might be interesting to see what shape that object is. So let me open that up, get our console going here. Should be above our errors. Article card. Okay, here we go. So article card has an object and an object, and it's just empty. Okay, well, that's interesting. So what that's telling you is that you're not passing any properties into article card. Again, what is this business about props? And the bottom line is it is just like attributes in HTML. I can make them up. If I want to say here, great read equals true, that may be a giant lie. It could be a terrible read. But if I go and check my object here, guess what? Great read came through, and it happens to be true. So props are just the values that you pass in here, and they look exactly like HTML attributes. So class name equals app. Again, that's a prop in JSX. So if I wanted to get past this, I can say, I can give it the dummy placeholder data. So if it needs an article object, I'm going to give it an empty article object. And let's go and see category. Category equals testing. So that's all I need to do to represent the pieces of data that I want injected into the props and made available inside that component. So now you can see article card has an article and a category. And it's simply whatever I assigned in here. Yes, you are. Sorry, I went over time on my break. My phone's on silent. I am so sorry. This is a lot. I know. React. Okay, let's put a 5-minute timer up. That is... Thank you very much for the reminder. Sorry, I get excited with all this React stuff. Okay, let's get back to it here. Okay. Questions back up here. So before the end of the lesson, could you give us a little intro to starting up our project? Yes, I will. And I see some questions on NPM or Yarn. Use either. If you don't know what that means, we'll get to that. We will go deeper on the command line tools on, I think, on Thursday. I think that's in Training Kit where it spells out how to use Create React App. But right now we're trying to accelerate our learning to use the what's it called? Code Sandbox. I want to call it CodePen. Code Sandbox basically includes all the stuff from Create React App and makes it a little easier to get started and eliminates any issues on local machines. So yes. So yeah, I'll walk into the afternoon project and we'll talk about it. I think that's where you'll get a chance to use some of the tooling there. Okay. Virginia asked a good question. This is kind of related to this whole like what's a component thing and like developers having really spanning questions or spanning definitions or reusing of words. And this is one of those, library versus framework. There is a definition, but depending on who you ask, they'll answer differently. You know, if someone wants to propose their code as a all-encompassing solution to everything, then they'll probably call it a framework. But if they don't want it to seem like a really difficult sell, then they'll probably go and call it a library. Because remember, at big companies, they need to make sure the licensing on a component is appropriate. They got to make sure it's trustworthy from a reputable source. All those things, they have a lot less. It's a little more daunting to get that approval for a whole new framework, but a library is maybe a little easier to swing. I know that's probably not the definition most people give, but in my experience, that's really like, there was a joke at one of my old enterprise jobs of, well, if you want to kill a proposal, just talk about the code as a framework, and then management would panic, and it would basically be called a research thing. Put it on the backlog. Move that to the backlog. We can't add a new framework. So these definitions can be a little funny like that. So this is a very, very important thing. I know this isn't on subject, but with this change, like the reason I want to get rid of anonymous comments in lecture is like, so real quick, if you're in my shoes, you keep seeing comments coming through, and sometimes you see the same comment. Sometimes it's from different people. Sometimes it's a trend that reflects a broad thing in the cohort. Sometimes it's just one person who just isn't getting something met or isn't getting a need met. And there is no, like, the anonymity here is real. I can't tell. Like, I would have to go through 500 steps to even begin to find out like who you are. And part of what we need to do here is it is completely on us to make it a safe environment for you to ask questions that you may feel stupid asking. I certainly feel stupid asking plenty of questions, but I understand there are people who have social anxiety and other things. This is why it's taken so long to make this change. You were very, very close in mind when we were thinking about this. And again, this isn't a final decision. Let me know. Reach out to me. Tell me how we can make this better. But really, we were having trouble making sure that I could close the loop. Again, follow up with students who I could answer their question, but just it was way out of topic for the lecture. And then they'd ask it again the next day. all it would take was a DM and just send them the message or send them some resource that, yeah, out of scope, but it'd get them what they need. I was not able to do that, and it was incredibly frustrating for me to just seem like uncaring or like I'm not reacting, when really I do have the answers, and I do have the resources or something for some of those questions, and I would love to provide them. So yeah, this is something that's a balancing act, and we are watching it very closely. Please keep this. Please keep this in your feedback. Let us know how this is working out. And with all the shift, Dustin is still the Unit 3 React guy now that we got 4 units. But Dustin's actually been moving, and he was actually in a car wreck over the holiday, and like he's had all kinds of stuff going on. So I'm helping shore up there to help out the team here. So, and yes, he's fine. His family's fine, but yeah. So I'm sorry, I promised all these other instructors, and sure enough, you will get exposure to plenty of other instructors at your time in Lambda. We're hiring instructors constantly here. So use effect, we're going to cover I think that's tomorrow or on Wednesday. How do you send state to different function components using hooks? We will look at the beginnings of that. So yeah, so Faye's asking a really good point here. Can you talk about importing? What is being imported in import React from React? And importing is, so you may have remember in our components when we were building in CodePen, we had a settings thing where we had to basically add any CDN links to Axios or style sheets or whatever library we wanted to use. You could drop that in right here. I mean, this is where you'd put it in. You put your scripts and your style sheets and all that stuff in your head tag. But with a modern React toolchain, that kind of goes out the window. You no longer use CDNs. Like, do not use CDNs if you need to import Axios, for example. This is how you do it. What's that? So on your local computer, you'll use NPM or Yarn. And again, that stuff is explored deeper in the coming days. But another reason I like Code Sandbox is it makes it super easy to add these things. When you click Add Dependency here, I can just type Axios. What do you know? Here it is. I click on it. It'll show up in this list. And if I wanted to use Axios, I just import it wherever I need it in that file. So, and you've probably seen syntax like this, these import statements, or const Axios equals require Axios. Usually right next to, let me actually show you, Axios. So when you're looking at docs, you'll often see both a CDN and an import statement. Okay, let's load. Okay, so here, this is kind of common, but you don't always see all of these. So you can see using NPM install Axios. Bower, I don't think anyone uses Bower anymore. Yarn add Axios. And so when people are asking about Yarn or NPM, use whatever you've got installed. Yarn is built by Facebook. That's why it's pretty common in the React world, which is also built by Facebook. So Yarn add and NPM install in your project command line, they do the same thing. But this is the method that we were using before. We were using a script tag with a source pointing to a CDN, a content distribution network, and in this case called unpackage is the one Axios chose. So these are options. You do not combine these. You have to pick one. So the way this works is if you ever got errors when you were trying to do this before, if you ever copy pasted examples with const axios, well, whenever you see something like this, it is interchangeable with the import syntax here. This is, let me just write a comment in here. This is ES6/ESM. So ESM means the ES module syntax specification. There's a lot of jargon I'm dumping in here. I just want to annotate this properly, so when you're Googling, you can kind of know what the important little shorthands mean. And then this is the ES5 CJS, common JS imports. So these have been how imports have been working in JavaScript for half a decade, maybe more, probably a decade. But this is the new method. So this is why you'll see import more and more. But just know that we're in the middle of this transitionary period where I'm trying not to give you the whole history lesson, but know that you will see these differences all over the web where, you know, it doesn't tell you in the Axios guide here to convert this over to imports, but you need to make a React app handle this properly or not give you errors or warnings. So those are just some of the things that are just kind of a lot of documentation will take for granted or just assume that the reader knows, which I think is probably unfair because soon no one's going to be writing these require style statements, and in a few years it's going to be common for developers to have not really seen or need to use these. So again, we're like always, developers are in kind of a transitionary state. Okay, so let's get back here. Okay, so I'll just label these example imports. Don't use CDNs with script tags or link tags. Link tags for like style sheets. Okay, so I hope that answers the question on imports. Again, there's a lot more to it, but really I want you to focus on just the important stuff on how to use these components, how to export your own component. Those are going to be the important things to pay attention to here. So again, when I'm saying import, this is the way you import a component. And when you want to, and by the way, there's a nice shorthand. If you hold Command and then click on one of these paths that you're importing, it's a nice handy way to just jump to that file. And often you can also Command click on the variables, and that really helps navigate a project. So even though React has kind of centralized a lot of the pieces of all the different types of files like template files, CSS files, JavaScript, it centralized them so you don't have too much jumping around. In modern frameworks, it's also pretty easy to jump around when you do have to from one component to the other. You can just Command click on the imported name. Cool pro tip. So let's take a look, and you can see that a lot of these components are just plain old or relatively plain objects here. They have props. Some of them may resemble the HTML properties or attributes that you're familiar with. In this case, class becomes class name, as we mentioned. But let's talk about, so we've talked about like some of the aspects of what components are and how they work in React. That's kind of a really broad subject area. But really the key things are the fact that you're exporting a function, whether it's a fat arrow function like this, or a traditional function like an ES5 function. Doesn't matter, as long as you're exporting it, this function now becomes your component. And it also, other key piece is it has to return some sort of JSX, some kind of HTML in here. So this next piece is kind of where the magic happens. This is where I think there was a question in Slido on this. We need to still affect change and store different data in our app. Now, React hooks have a new way to manage state and to make things stateful. And it's going to be very similar, or it's not very similar. It's going to be more familiar to those who've done last week's content. So let's scroll down here. The example in here was pretty good. So there's an example in Training Kit where they're tracking whether you have a light bulb on or off. And they've got hard-coded image URLs, and they've got these two images here, and it renders kind of like this. In fact, let me open a new code sandbox. And again, this is why when I was saying, like, yeah, getting started with the command line tools is cool, but it's really easy to get started with Code Sandbox. Assuming you don't have 20 of them open, it loads rather quickly. And you can just pick to create a React one. And inside my index, I'm just going to select all and paste that. And hopefully this pops through with our light bulbs. Give it a sec to compile. Oh, wow, I think I crossed the threshold of too many sandboxes open. Like, I can see each line render the color highlighting. Okay, computer, stay with me. Okay, so here is, so this is a really cool thing that we just saw is I can just copy paste React code, and this is kind of one of the benefits of having a reusable, or the ultimate test of reusable code. Could I just copy the bits here and make it work in a fresh context in a different project? That is a hallmark of code that's reusable. Can it just be taken over without considering all these other files or other things that may be needed? So let's go and let's actually use this example because it's really tightly focused. So I want to start at this point. So React has this hook called useState. Now, hooks are you've probably heard all the buzz. If you haven't, there's buzz in it, be on Reddit and all the other programming and Twitter and all the places programmers congregate these days. So React hooks kind of took over way faster than any of the React people anticipated. And it was for good reason. So let's take a look at how to use it. Now, I don't want to get into all the theory on what are hooks and what can hooks do for you? Everything. So let's focus on just storing state. And what is state? Like when I'm talking about state, here it's a counter. Here it's a Boolean value. I can tell because it's light on, and that's going to be true or false. So let me get a thread here. And state isn't something unique to React or exclusive to React. The way it uses it and the syntax around it is very, very specific. But I just hit that thread in WEB21. So John, it's not quite immutable data, though it could be, but The props are generally the immutable part of the equation here. State is mutable. But it is data, yeah. The current state of our objects, the current data we're working with. And it's okay if you don't know. It's if you're in the U.S., you may be like, I thought I was living in a state, and in a state of confusion, and in a state of the developers. It's maddening. So yes, we reuse the word state to mean data, the data that's in your app, the data that is local to our component. So when a senior dev on your team is looking at your app component, saying which light is on, you can say, well, the state is set to true because I console logged it right here and I can see light on is true. Exactly. And so this is one of those really broad terms where state just refers to the data. In fact, the DOM is a representation, is a form of state and state persistence. Like as you're interacting with it and you see things flashing and changing in your inspector, it's changing the data that's stored in that tree. It's a data tree. So state is all around you. It's in state the whole time. And with React, we get a very specific way to interact with it. Excellent answers. Let me get these on screen for the recording. Excellent. Really specific answer, Faye. That's fantastic. State keeps track of data that changes in that component, like adding a counter that counts up or down based on button presses. That's kept track of in the state. Excellent. And Ben says a snapshot representation of our data. Well, if we watch it, if we observe it at a point in time, yeah, it's a snapshot. But we try to think of it as something that's evolving over time. And if you're thinking of the read-only version or the immutable one, that is going to be on that's props. So there's a lot of confusion usually about, well, what state, what's props. We're going to look at that more in terms of getting our hands dirty with it and setting values here. So let's look at this example here. So the important thing when you're using this use state, so if we're in a situation where we need to track, let's say a counter, or when I click this button, I want this text box to change. How do I make that happen? Or let's go and let me actually make that a little simpler, because even that could have a bit of a gotcha there. So let's add a counter, like Faye was saying, let's add a counter to our basic button. I'm gonna make this enclosed inside this button. I wanna make it say here how many times it's been clicked. Like right here, I wanna say, click me. I've been clicked so now we have this variable here. I want to track that, but I want it to be stateful so that I can change it in the component, because I could hard code it, but that doesn't help me. I could say click count equals 10, and cool, it'll say I've been clicked 10 times, and when I click it, well, it's still been clicked 10 times. So now I've made a button into a liar. You may be thinking, well, what about that props thing we learned? We just took a look at earlier. I could do a props for it and say props dot click count. And so I'll explain that a bit later. So right here, when I do click count equals this props.click count, okay, well now I'm not getting an error, but it doesn't have a value. This is probably undefined. So there's a couple things that I could do to get this data in here. And this is something that's, these are the the key pieces of React that you're gonna work through. But this is not, props are something that are going to come from your top level JSX. Wherever you're calling the component, your key value with the equal signs, your key values here are going to be your props. And here's my button. I could pass props in here. I could say, give it a color, give it a count. Maybe I want to start my count at 1. And see, 1 comes through there. But I need this to actually be reactive. I need it to change when I'm doing stuff. And this is the problem that state solves, or use state. So you'll see here it gets imported. And again, this is where the import syntax is a little weird. And it may take a few times copying and pasting it before you memorize this stuff. That's okay. This stuff is really good to copy paste because there's more important stuff for your brain to remember. But this is how we get access to use state. We got to make sure we import it. So let me go back to my button. I'm going to try and make it so that button can count. Gosh darn it. Okay, so use state. Let's see, the React example here is basically a very similar example to what we're doing. And it's important let me name this right. Okay, so this is a convention that is, that's really important. The use state hook returns an array. Use state, let me check my, am I on the latest version of React? I am not. Okay, make sure you are on a recent version of React to get access to the correct use state hook. So here I'm using 16.8.6. And again, with Code Sandbox, all you do to update your library is you click this little refresh icon, and it just does it. So there we go from 16.5. Let's upgrade these scripts here. Okay. There we go. So use state is important. Or use state takes one argument, and that is the default value that you want the state tracking value to keep track of the first time it's executed. As your component lives on, behind the scenes, React is actually tracking how many times this gets run, what was the last value changed. There's a complex flow of things behind the scenes, which we don't really need to get into, at least not yet. It's important that as long as you understand how to get a value out of state and how to use the setter. So the setter for the state is going to be, this is the piece that we want to tie in to the on-click handler that we were covering way back at the beginning of this lecture. We focused on we looked at the on-click handler on a button. And I think I asked that one in Slack. And we're going to do exactly that. So let me show you exactly how this looks. We're going to have an on-click. There's the example. So on-click, where we can pass the set light on. That isn't, that's got a slight bug in it. Okay, this says everything's broken. Yeah, so pay attention to the training kit. Some of these are walking you through some of the common bugs or syntax oversights that happen to everyone. So what we're looking for is a correct on-click handler looks like this, where we're actually, everything's on fire. So the difference between is This one executes immediately. Anything between the curly braces is just going to execute and get returned. And for an on-click handler, that probably needs to be a function so that it can be called later. Well, the way you make that make it so it can be called later, you simply add a fat arrow function in front of it that kind of wraps it up in a neat little package and says, hey, JSX, hold up executing this until you're ready. Here, use this function to defer running this when you need it and as many times as you need it. So we're going to make an on-click here. And we want to do a fat arrow there. And so here's where we call our set click count. So set click count, it takes whatever shape argument you passed in here, like a number. If we're working with a number, you want to stick to that. So we can say, let's set the value to click count plus 1. Okay, and let me actually console log in here so you can see how this is being fired. My phone's buzzing me for our next break. Time flies when you're having React fun. So let's just see if this works. Oh my God, it works. See, so I keep clicking and it keeps adding to it. Let me go and open my console to show you what it prints out. And you can see every time I am clicking on here, it keeps on counting. Excellent, excellent. Okay, let me put 5 minutes up. And I will see you in a type 5. Okay, let's get back here. Okay, so answered a couple questions on Slido and writing here. So I almost overlooked some really important syntax stuff that is that Amir brought up here, and I really want to go deeper on this. So destructuring maybe new to some is new to a lot of you probably with those object keys out of the props value, but it also is related to or destructuring also works on arrays. Let me show you a replit I got that I prepared to kind of explore this or showcase this. Come on. Okay. If it'll open. Let me close some of my code sandboxes for a minute. Okay, so here, let's see what is going on here with the destructuring first. So down below, let's look at this from line 11 onward here. Just real quick. So if you had an array of my cars, which this is like my vision board, in an array, of course, because I'm a developer. So we've got a Porsche, a Tesla, and an Audi here in my list of array or my array of my cars. So that's great and all, but what if you're saying, okay, car fan, what about I just want the first and the second car in your list. So you can represent that in code using this way, which is probably new to you, or this other syntax, which involves a lot more lines. And these two lines here get kind of replaced by this pattern here. So where you have a bunch of const this equals this, and you've got to keep track of the naming with the indexes, and if anything shifts, it can be annoying. Like you've got to track a lot of moving parts here. It doesn't seem like a lot, but when things get like bigger, you're dealing with a lot larger project. It can be really hard to keep track of large arrays or just sequences of data. So if you're just trying to pull things out of a config object, for example, if you're loading my game profile and you want to show my like racing jacket with the right logos, well, cool. You can highlight, let's say the first two logos go on the front and the back. Okay, well, cool. That's all I need to render the jacket. Okay, so now I can pull those out and name those values and just access them below because they're automatically assigned. These are interchangeable. They do the exact same thing. Lines 12 and 13 are replaced by line 14. So if you may be wondering, well, what happened to Audi? Oh, it was my third pick, so I didn't really. But again, if I wanted that, I can be like the third one. And if I just needed to put that with the first car and my third one down here and run that, we can see it'll put Porsche and then Audi because I told it to print both now. So this is not like some exclusive React feature. This is something that is a core in JavaScript that React has really popularized. And so real quick, let's look at an example in isolation here to show you how this affects the use state hook. So use state here, this would be the, using a old school way to do it would be getting out the state value, but state's an array. Now I've got to get the color out of the first item and then the set color, a function out of the next. Here's how you use those values. So this would be okay. I mean, I can still use this function, set color, and I could change it. And then the next time this function executes, assuming this was in a proper function, this useState hook would return yellow after I call the setter. Now, this leads to a lot of code sprawl, and it also makes you name a temporary value. So pay attention to this weird, the reason they did this is state or my color or whatever I would have named this value is less about the nature of, hey, I've got a piece of data and I've got this like function that are connected. The function updates the data, but they're kind of in parallel. That leads to like these awkward naming conventions, and you start getting to computer sciencey terms like tuples, and you end up with really dense code that's really hard to understand and read. So when you move over to actually using destructuring, you can take this and say, I don't want to have any temporary value. I just want to say, hey, my color is in the first index, and then the set color function is in the second position. And now I've represented it and extracted those values, and that's it. That is the syntax, the important bit of syntax I want you to get familiar with and practice, because you're going to see a lot of it. Okay, so let me see. Are there any questions on destructuring? If there are, make sure ask them in the help channel. I know that the TLs had some great resources on that. Oh, and I see Landry posted excellent resources from javascript.info in Web21. Those are great resources for that. Okay, so let's recap our objectives, make sure we're on track here. So explain what state is in web applications and demonstrate how to make a React component stateful. Well, we used the useState hook. We built it into our function here, and we explored, well, some of the syntax around this destructuring. Again, hey, it can count. So there's a lot more that can be done with it. There's a lot of, the complexity can go up quite a bit, if you can imagine, beyond just the button that counts. But for now, we want to focus on these techniques and give you the practice needed to build on in the coming days, where we'll really explore props, passing data via props. We figured out what props are. They're just attributes, but how to pass data around and between components, that is where we start to get a bit more complex here. So, and so yeah, we've completed this, change the state of a component with a quick listener. Well, we changed the state and we even made it render to our page. So let me go back to take a look at our project for the end of the day. So American football scoreboard. You can tell there's a lot of soccer fans or football fans on the team. So the instructions here do include a lot of the individual steps you'll need to do. However, you are going to be asked to use either Yarn or NPM. If you don't have Yarn installed, that's okay. You don't need it. I know there's sometimes confusion in just looking at React docs. Oftentimes they only mention Yarn. And again, if you don't know what Yarn is, it doesn't matter. You can just use the NPM install. And if you don't know what NPM install is, reach out to me or reach out to your TL. We've got a ton of resources on the depths of this stuff. But for right now, if you follow these instructions, you get your American football scoreboard cloned. Make sure you run the npm install command and npm start. do your regular branching, you'll be in good shape to just start the project. So, thanks, Christina. Those are great resources. I just posted to WEB21. So the ultimate project is you're going to have a really brightly colored scoreboard. It's mostly put together. You just need to make sure that you've added the ability to track your team scores, and you're going to be doing something that looks a lot like the counter we were doing in our button handler. And you can see here it's telling you to use your on-click handler, and if you're not a big fan of the sports ball, you might learn something about a touchdown and and a field goal. Sorry, we troll the soccer fans here. How much are touchdowns worth in there? They don't find it funny. So I want to point out these stretch goals here are stretch goals. You're not expected to do all or even one of these. These really are designed to be a little challenging. If you find one of them is easy, great. That means you've probably been studying up and you're well practiced, and that's great. But these are, if you're on track with the rest of the cohort, these are designed to really be a stretch. So just keep that in mind. I know we've got people at all different levels here, so keep in mind when you're sharing your solutions or sharing resources to how you solved 3 stretches. Make sure you mention that, hey, I spent the whole break researching this, or I want to make sure people's imposter syndrome isn't inflamed but I also want to make sure you got a place to share all the cool stuff you're learning. So just make sure to put a little bit of caveat there. Okay, so let's see. I think there is a where's the assets? I thought there was a design file, but if you run project, the whole thing runs, and filling in the logic is just connecting a lot of the dots we've played with today with the use state hook. And that's really the key. So we want to see you demonstrating use state properly and returning your components as JSX, or returning the view as JSX. Figuring out how to put values or render the score inside your template or your JSX. Again, really a key takeaway for today. Let's go here. Let me answer a few questions before we wrap. So this is a good question from Greg. With React, how often will we be using the conventional HTML, JS methods we learned in the first 6 weeks to create web pages? Is it best to use React only or only when it's needed? So the idea is a lot of the specific syntax you've been learning, you won't be using like document.querySelector, but you will need to know how to write those selector statements when we get to styling our React components, or like all these things kind of come back again. It may feel like we're throwing away a lot of knowledge when really all that knowledge served to scaffold and structure and give you a stable ground to, a stable platform to build your React understanding on. So now that you know how to manually put together DOM elements and structure the DOM programmatically, it's going to be really helpful when you're debugging JSX issues, because behind the scenes, it's doing the exact same thing. So it's important to know just one layer deep beyond what you're using for when problems come up. They really help you, or it'll really help you when you're reading errors. A DOM error might leak out of React, and then you'll know, wait, am I using a component that maybe isn't handling the DOM properly, or is maybe adding event listeners how it shouldn't? And so it's really, when you see an on-click handler, behind the scenes it's doing an add event listener. So it's very helpful to know that. It's hard to, trust me though, you'll see it when you start running into those issues. So why are we doing props? Props, we're going to go back. We're going to deal with passing data into props and dealing with this and changing state and passing that through props. That's what tomorrow's about. Props in React are just whenever you have an attribute value, like class name equals whatever class. Like that's a prop. It's just a string. But so props are everywhere there. The passing data around between props, that is tomorrow. So yes, I feel like you're going to explain how to utilize hooks without explaining hooks in depth. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Because that's sort of tossing me for a loop in fully comprehending this. Yes, that's a great point, Samuel. This was intentional. There's a lot of stuff out there that is a lot of theory that deals with a lot of React history, trying to sell people on hooks. And like, I'm part of that, I'm the audience for that. And I wanted to make sure I didn't confuse or introduce a historical lesson on some of the stuff that's not critical and essential for this lesson. And that is the objectives are to be able to use state and update values in a React component. So if that's the objective, the important thing is being able to use it. Now, there are tons of hooks out there that are being developed that do all kinds of things other than tracking state. And we will definitely get a bigger picture painted on what they are and some of the high level concepts as we go through the week. But I want to focus on the actionable takeaways. Because if you can use the thing, if you can do the thing, well, you get paid to do the thing. It doesn't matter if you can write a paragraph about it or a thesis paper. But can you use it? Can you do the work? Cool. It's likely someone will pay you to do that. So really, I want to focus on the most actionable things here. But again, if that wasn't that helpful, if you need the high level or maybe more of the why, please, again, reach out to me. I am paying really close attention to feedback and trying to internalize and adapt to it. So if you need something specific or need something more on that front, reach out. And this bit here, I snuck in data category was basically, this is shorthand to say, if you don't have a category variable set, these two pipes or pipe characters is what they are, is telling you the default value is going to just be the string none. So it's like if category is falsy or null or undefined, cool. Don't show undefined there, write none. So that's just a fallback technique. It's a little too cute for its own good, as it's really short there. Okay, so state, again, in your app, it is the data that is being used to render and present your app to the user. Okay. Amir, great destructuring questions here. So destructuring and named imports have similar syntax, but they're frustratingly different. And trust me, there was a lot of really angry discussions on the JavaScript steering committees on how those don't line up. But again, I don't want to get into a whole history thing there. They are different, but all you need to worry about really is paying attention to the examples you find. And if you see a const Axios equals require, if you know how to say import Axios from quotes Axios is the version of that, once it's in your muscle memory, that's like 80% of what's important there. Now, there are other things, but most important for now. And again, this default thing, when I said export default, like export default, you want to make sure you're always doing that. Export default with with functions or named arrow functions. That is part of this new import syntax. And again, that's a whole class on its own that just deals with some real minutia. It'd probably be better to read those articles that Christina posted, as well as that reference Landry posted for JavaScript info. Those are solid resources for this, and they get deep in the weeds. But again, don't spend your entire day reading into that. You can really get lost down the history path there. Okay, Anissa, yes, React seems deceptively fun, and it even promises painless. So I guess it's fun and painless. I think we have a winner here. So JSX here does require slashes for single tags. So Catherine points out a really good point here. You can't just do. So if I wanted to make a line break in here and say BR, this BR would be valid in regular HTML, but that's not going to work here. You need to put a forward slash in the end there. And some people liken this to XML, which is related syntax, so really touchy like this. It really needs to be exactly right. You can't just, sometimes this thing has a slash in it, sometimes it doesn't. This is for elements that don't have a closing element. Like in our index, if these meta attributes or links were inside the JSX, we would have to write them like this. And this is still valid. It's just not needed with HTML5, but JSX needs it. Okay, that's an important point. So Amir asked another great question. Why doesn't the add event listener work in React? Oh, here's the funny thing is, it kind of does. Well, it will work for a split second. The problem is you don't want to use it because what's happening is React is constantly deciding whether to regenerate new elements because things may change. In fact, if you look up here, if we go back to our counting button, it may be re-rendering. In this specific case, it's not re-rendering the whole thing, but in a more complex example, it may be re-rendering this component and replacing the button every time it changes. It won't look like it. But it's actually, that's all part of that virtual DOM and diffing and all those trivia bits in there. But if it's constantly removing and applying, if you are constantly not sure if your React tree or your React JSX is going to keep those DOM elements actually on the page, because React is really doing a lot to manage the DOM elements on the page. You don't get to see them directly. And in fact, that's the whole point of this on-click property here, or this on-click prop. This replaces your add event listener, click, comma, here's my set click count. The reason you want to do it this way is it makes it so React can now manage the add event listener and remove event listener. So when the element is removed from the DOM, it's automatically cleaned up. Like you don't even have to worry about that. I mean, that's something that most people forget to do when they're using regular vanilla JS. Modern machines have plenty of memory and it's rarely a worry to clean up those handlers. Well, React can manage it better by just using this pattern where you have a more declarative way to set these handlers. You express a function with an on-click. And now I don't have to write elsewhere in some other part of my code, document or a element.add event listener, for instance, click, and this, where that happens, it might not it might not start listening in time before I click. Like the sequence of things, it leaves a lot of room for bugs. But here, if I'm marrying the template, my JSX, with my handler, and it's kind of stitched together right in place on the page, it actually eliminates a lot of the potential for bugs around the sequence of when these things get attached. It also makes sure it only gets attached once, because some people ran into bugs with that. So there's a lot of benefits here, and one is this on-click convention or on. You can see if you just type on here in Code Sandbox, there are a ton of events that are built in And you'll probably recognize a lot of these from when we were working with DOM events. So here we see our copy paste on drag. Hey, remember all these? So again, like while you're not using the literal syntax from last week, all of that knowledge, it dovetails in and will support you on this React adventure. And again, when in a few years' time, when there's a new framework or when you're on the job and there's a new, when they ask you to use Ember or a Vue, whatever it is, the common stuff we learned last week or the past few weeks, those themes and those threads will trickle in all throughout your time working in front-end frameworks. So you don't, and React's solution to this problem where you have these inline handlers on the elements, I really love it. Really makes things a lot cleaner. Oh, let me not leave a bug in there. Okay, save that so you have it. Okay, we just got a few minutes left here. So yeah, I want to really point out that add event listener may seem to work for a split second, even for longer than that. It's as soon as the state tree changes, React will blast away those DOM nodes and your event listener is suddenly not there anymore. And React didn't have any idea to keep track of it and make sure it is being applied. Excellent, excellent question. Again, similar to, yeah, I think I just covered that with that answer. So do we need to download and install something to start our project? I'm a little confused about that part. I already have Yarn when I installed less. So Jocelyn, the project, I believe if you clone it and just go and do the npm install command. Where was my project link? Right here. I believe it's all set up for you. So let me just double check our package JSON. Yeah, so this is already a create React app based app. So you don't have to set up a fresh create React app. We'll get into that, but right here, if you do a npm install, you highlight it right here. These steps right here are critical in the project setup. So pay attention to this block right here. It's going to be a little different than previous projects. I know it's a tendency to just gloss over this, but these lines I'm highlighting right here are the critical pieces. Okay. And if you have any trouble or any environment issues getting set up, there could be, make sure to reach out or screenshot those errors and post them in the help channel. I think all the gotchas that could come up, we've seen, and the TLs or myself can jump on and help you get that answered. Okay, well, we're right 1 minute before lunch. I think I have most of these questions answered. If I missed any of them, or if I haven't got your questions answered, or I see a couple of them came in late. Oh wait, my Slido might be doing weird things. If I missed any of your questions, again, reach out. But I hope everyone's excited for getting into React this afternoon. Excellent. Thank you all. Have a good lunch. Make sure to take a break and let all this percolate. Good luck today.